Hello and welcome to Workings of a Wishing Chair. For those who don't know, Wishing Chair Productions is the resident puppet theater at the Nashville Public Library in Nashville, Tennessee. This is a tradition that began in 1938 with Tom Tishner and his marionettes. But nearly 25 years ago, the program became Wishing Chair Productions as a nod to Tishner's work and the special chair that he built, where children would come to the library, then sit in the chair, and on their birthday, make a wish. And that is why we are called Wishing Chair Productions. Thanks for joining us. I hope you like the show.
I'm Jennifer Klein, and I costume puppets for Wishing Chair Productions. I started out on the puppet truck years ago, going around Davidson County, taking puppet shows to kids all over Davidson County. And when the library started building more of their own shows, I started helping them costume the shows and have moved more into becoming a costumer for Wishing Chair. So that's mostly what I do. First, when they're building a new show at the library, Brian will send over a script of the show and give me a general outline of how it's going to look. And then he will send me sketches of each of the characters and their various costumes that they're wearing. And I will work from the sketches and build patterns for each costume. When they have puppet armature, which is the body created, they will send that over to me so that I can take measurements to make my patterns really accurate. And using those puppets, I will create a costume directly onto the puppet, which is different than dressing a human character because, of course, they have to be able to take it off and put it back on. But puppets, you can build it directly onto the puppet, sew it right to the puppet because they won't be changing costume anytime during the show. If you need a character in different costumes, you build another puppet and put him in that different costume. So I will take my measurements and I will create patterns, and it's very much like dressing humans, regular sized humans, except it's on a much tinier scale. So I make these little tiny pattern pieces often. This is a shirt piece. This is a pair of pants, part of a pants pattern. So they look very similar to what the full-size patterns would be, just a tiny scale. And so I will use the pattern pieces to build the costume. And I generally hand sew everything because, again, I'm working at such a small scale. It's just much easier to hand sew. I can finesse it a lot more easily. And especially if I'm building it directly on the puppet, hand sewing makes a lot more sense most of the time. And then the other challenge of dressing puppets as opposed to human characters is the scale. It's not so challenging building the pattern pieces, but choosing fabrics and notions and trims and buttons and things, you just have to take the miniature scale into consideration, and it really affects the kinds of patterns you're looking for, the kinds of fabric weight, the size of a piece of trim or notion, and the size of a button. Sometimes I just use little beads instead of buttons because, things are just that much smaller. It's more challenging that way, but it's kind of fun to work with that. It gives me a whole different perspective on the patterns I'm looking at. I just look at everything in a whole new way when I'm building a puppet, as opposed to costuming a human. And also, because these costumes are built directly onto the puppet, you don't have to create the every layer. You don't have to finish every single layer. So only the shirt front is going to show. I only really need to make the shirt front on a puppet. So I can think differently about how I'm going to create those pieces. Making a shirt collar, I'm not going to go through the whole process you do to make an actual shirt on a human. I just need it to look like a shirt collar and present like that. So I'm making a lot of modifications and changes to the way that I I create a costume piece that gives it that facsimile of what it's supposed to be. And that's an interesting challenge a lot of the times. Another thing that I really enjoy about working with Wishing Chair is all the variety of puppets that we get to make. Not just types of puppets, for everything from hand and rod to hand puppets to marionettes, to full-size sort of puppets, but also the types of characters, because we've everything from fairy tale characters and really fantastical fairies and things like in Midsummer Night's Dream, but also and working on String City when I was actually costuming historical country music stars in well-known, sometimes iconic costumes, like Hank Williams' famous white suit with the musical notes on it, and Dolly Parton, one of her fabulous Dolly Parton red carpet looks. And so the challenge there was, of course, to be really faithful to the original costume that I'm reproducing, but also, make it work in the context of it being a puppet in a puppet show. So that was really a fun challenge to create that show. But I just like all the different variety that we get to work on. It keeps things really interesting.
Hello, friends. My name is Evelyn, and I am a puppeteer with Wishing Chair Productions and the Puppet Truck. And I actually get to work on costumes a lot. I sew and quilt, anything with fabric and stitching. I'm your gal. So it's been really fun to work on costumes and other fabric arts for puppets. And today I have a couple of things that I want to share with you that I've recently worked on. So the first one that I've got here, this is the King. He is from the show Many Moons. And he is actually a Peco puppet from our Peco puppet collection. And his suit was starting to get really sad and dreary. The fabric was yellowing with age, and it was wearing away because he's been in so many shows. And so last spring, I was asked to redo the suit, make it exactly the same as before, just with new fabric. And so what I had to do is I had to take the suit completely off of him, deconstruct it, and I had to lay out all the pieces flat and basically made a pattern from the old suit. This is the new one, and the fabric is new and white and crisp. There aren't any holes or anything wearing away anymore. And what I had to do is take off all of the decorations very carefully, and I also had to record exactly where everything went so that I could put it all back exactly how it was before. So I carefully saved the epaulets and his necklace and all the trimmings on his wrists and his neck and everywhere, and then reapplied them once the new suit was constructed. So I think he turned out really nicely, and now he looks brand new. We've got a new show that we recently put together, and it is called Lorraine, the girl who sang the storm away. And this is the Lorraine puppet. And I was invited to make the costumes for our two main characters in Lorraine, and that is Lorraine and also Papaw. Let me show you Papaw real quick too. He's real sweet. Papaw has these overalls and a nice plaid shirt. So what we wanted to do was work from the illustrations in the book. The book was written by Ketch Secor and illustrated by Higgins Bond. And we wanted to work directly from the illustrations in the book. And so if you read the story, you'll see that Papaw wears overalls and plaid shirts. So we wanted to make sure that we made those for him. And Lorraine has a couple of dresses in the book. but we went with the bright yellow. Loved the color of this and just the look and the feel for our production. So I started with those illustrations, and then sometimes what's easiest for me to do is to work with doll patterns. I will actually get doll patterns to start with, and that gives me a place to begin, right? And then from there, I make adjustments. And so Lorraine actually fit a doll pattern for, I think it was a 14-inch doll, and then I made adjustments to it in order to fit her specifically. But that gave me a good place to start. We picked fabric. I think actually this yellow fabric was from our fabric stock here in the workshop, and then I sewed them. Now we actually have 2 Lorraine puppets and 2 Papa puppets that are identical, because Papa and Lorraine both play an instrument in the show, and so we have puppet versions of them holding and playing their instruments. So I actually had to make 2 identical yellow dresses for Lorraine and 2 identical sets of overalls and shirts for Papa. On his little overalls, we used little gold brads and took them apart and used those for the buckles of his overalls. Sometimes you have to get creative when you're making tiny, tiny costumes for puppets.
Well, thank you, Jennifer and Evelyn, for sharing your wonderful talents with us. Thank you all for watching. Join us next week when we talk about building sets for our puppet shows with Wishing Chair Productions at the Nashville Public Library. See you next week.